So hello everyone, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming out. This is Washtenaw Bird and Nature Alliance's monthly program, and we're so thrilled today to have Ben Lucking actually in person. Last month we had him broadcasting about our Costa Rica trip from Baku in Azerbaijan, so he isn't often live and in person. We're very, very grateful to have him here. There are so many events coming up. I should say that everyone's welcome, and if you want to read our full DEI statement, which we are going to keep, you can find it on our website. The May count is coming up May 10th, and I'm going to need as many volunteers as humanly possible. Joe Kennedy is here. He's doing some recruiting for Salem Township. Yako's here. He's going to be probably needing some folks in Pittsfield Township. I'm going to need folks in Ann Arbor and Lodi, et cetera, et cetera. Check the website. There's even area leader positions that are open right now. So let me know if you can help out in any way that way. I'm not sure if I introduced myself. Did I? I'm Juliette Berger. I'm the president of Washtenaw Bird and Nature Alliance for a couple more months. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be around, and past president is a board position, so I'll still be on the board making trouble like I usually do. So put May 10th on your calendar. You'll probably hear from me or reach out. There's a sign-up sheet now for the May count on the website. Dana is over here selling our new t-shirts and hats with our new logo and whatnot, and they're very lovely. I'm wearing one and I'm wearing the hat. She wants everyone to know that there are 2 Searles work days coming up. As you may know or may not know, we own a property in Augusta Township, southern part of the county, called the Searles Nature Preserve, and every month we're trying to do restoration work days there. So Saturday, April 26th, it's going to be from 2 to 4. And we have some tools and gloves available, so you don't need to worry about bringing your own stuff. Unless you have a chainsaw, then bring it down. Saturday, May 31st, the time is yet to be determined, but that's the next Searles workday after this one at the end of April. The one at the end of April is April 26th, and that also is a day that we're doing a walk for wildflowers and birds at the Nan Weston Preserve. If you've never been there, it's absolutely gorgeous. The wildflower show is unlike anything I've ever seen. And there's good birds there too, in migration especially. So you can do that from 8 to 10:30 and then go to the Searles workday if you should choose to do so. So we have some exciting events coming up for next month. We will have right here Victor Chen, who's doing our YouTube live feed, and Brandon Freeman are going to do a presentation for us about Black Birders Week and why that matters. We're very excited, and there's Victor's got quite a few events up on our website and Facebook page with Black Birders Week events. So don't miss the program and don't miss the bird walks and other events. There's a talk at the library. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And many thanks to Victor for arranging those things. Victor leads our BIPOC walks as well as all kinds of other events for Washtenaw Bird and Nature Alliance, and he's our education chair. Tonight, we have Ben Lucking. So great to have you here in person, as I said. Ben's going to be giving us a program on birding in Peru. Ben's a guide for all kinds of birding trips for WBNA, for Wings Birding Tour Group, and he also does private tours with other groups around the world. So please help me give a welcome to Ben Lucking.
Thank you, Juliet. All right. All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? All right. So today I'll be speaking about Peru. Not all of it, because that's just too much altogether. There are about 1,800 species of bird in the country of Peru. Give or take, it's first or second in the world for the most species of bird, and that's down to just the sheer diversity of habitats across the country. Today I'll mostly be talking about northern Peru, which is kind of the real peak of diversity anywhere in the world for birds, as well as a little bit about what we have up here, which is like the coastal areas around Lima, which is sort of where anyone flying into Peru sort of begins that trip for the most part. So I'll start with Lima. Lima is basically this, in an otherwise quite tropical country, especially along the eastern areas. Lima and the coastal areas of Peru are generally very, very dry, like some of the driest deserts anywhere in the world. And so, of course, they have very, very different bird life from even just, 20 miles off into the mountains. So that sort of brings about quite a bit of diversity. So here is Lima itself, and Miraflores is one of the nicer districts in central Lima. Very beautiful coastline. A lot of that greenery you see there is just basically watered by the sea breeze. As you get a little bit further away from the water itself and any flatter areas where water doesn't really collect, that is just completely bare. Almost no life of any kind at all. But the actual coast itself is very much full of life. So even though it's just south of the equator, Peru, the whole coastline is backs up onto the Humboldt Current, a very rich cold current that hosts all sorts of marine life. One of the most famous birds around that coastline is the Inca terns, these tons of Inca terns that just litter the sort of rocky coastlines around Lima. I think they're called Salvador Dali birds, colloquially, with that big mustache. Very funny looking terns, and you can see 500 or 1,000 at once often in some of the nesting colonies, just even in central Lima itself. Quite a few of them nest on one of the buildings on the main pier in downtown. So really cool looking birds they are. And another surprising bird that some people might not expect to be right there in the tropics are the Humboldt penguins that make use of the current as well. And so quite a few breeding colonies of them just around Lima itself as well. So quite a common-ish sight along the coastline there. Funny to have sort of penguins, and then you don't have to travel too far before you're seeing Amazonian tropical species. All right. Really funny little penguins. Very similar to Magellanic penguins for the south and African penguins in southern Africa. There's also Peruvian boobies here. And there's a couple of cormorant species that are pretty much endemic to the Humboldt Current, so endemic meaning found essentially nowhere else. So you've got these red-legged cormorants and also guanai cormorants. These are all red-legged here, the sort of browner, white-looking ones, they're immatures. And then if you look in the back left there's that brighter color. That's the adult. Some blackish oyster catchers as well. All of these just using that rocky shoreline right along that really cold water along the center of Lima. And then other birds that you can actually get up here in North America, surf birds, and ruddy turnstones as well, a lot of the time using sort of the lower edges of the rocks where there's a lot of crustaceans. And there's also some representatives of more tropical families that are endemic here as well. So this is a surf Synclodes. Synclodes are a group of mostly mountain and high elevation species related to, it's a very large tropical family, the ovenbirds, which includes wood creepers and spinetails and all of these birds that are generally associated with lowland tropical habitats. this one is one of the very few that is and solely found in the surf zone along the rocky edges of the Humboldt Current. There's Peruvian pelicans as well, quite similar to brown pelicans, but larger. Here is fellow WBNA member Isaac, scoping for, I think we were watching some redneck phalaropes at that time. And there's also, those cliffs that you see on the right there are actually covered in Inca tern nests as well, so. It is. It's very near, yeah. Yeah, it's a little sketchy getting down to that point. It's really, the drop off in that little crevice is pretty crazy. And there's this guy. So this is a Peruvian thickney, a very strange nocturnal shorebird. You can tell it's nocturnal with those huge eyes, meant to collect a lot of light. And you tend to find these guys in sort of habitat that looks like almost nothing should be able to survive there. If it looks like there shouldn't be a bird there, it probably has a Peruvian thickney just stood very still in the middle of it. And then there's great grebes. So there's quite a few coastal lagoons as well as these rocky coastlines. There's some marshier areas where rivers are sort of flowing out into the Pacific there. And those hold quite a lot of species, including a lot of our shorebirds, but also local birds like this great grebe. And there's also many-colored rush tyrants, very colorful bird that sort of ranges from Argentina all the way north through Peru. And our black neck stilts that, they just about make it to Michigan actually, but mostly in the southern US, but they're right along down the coast of Peru too. And some more familiar American birds, or at least a few here. So most of those gulls are actually Franklin's gulls, so they sort of breed on the, I guess, kind of boreal lakes in Manitoba for the most part, that sort of northwest plains area. And then they migrate almost the entire population in really large groups usually, all the way down to the coasts of Peru and all of that area. And so you see thousands of them down there, absolutely thousands. There's also some gray-hooded gulls mixed in the upper left there and some black skimmers. And some other familiar South American waterfowl, these white-cheeked pintails. Those are quite common around the coastal lagoons there. And then another habitat that we have along the coasts of Peru in general, especially around Lima, what's called lomas. And so this is basically where there's a bit of a hill that faces the coast, and the air that's coming off of the Humboldt Current with a lot of moisture, even though there is absolutely no rain at all in the region, this air is basically hitting these coastal facing slopes and collecting there, especially in their winter, which is sort of our summer, being south of the equator, of course. And that sort of moist air is just enough to liven these slopes with greenery, flowers. You'll go pretty much instantly from as barren of a desert as you can find with not a single type of plant anywhere as far as you can see, to these really quite lush slopes actually. And so lots of birds gather, especially in the austral winter down there. So these birds are actually Raymond's yellow finches, a very, very localized nomadic bird that basically follows the blooming flowers and stuff on the lomas. And very rarely do you see them, but if you do see them, you see a lot of them. In this case, I saw and this was a flock of well into the thousands probably, which for such a globally rare species is quite crazy to see. I mean, yeah, and the sound of the flock as it's going up and down and being chased by various raptors is quite impressive. There's also some austral migrants there. So this is a dark-faced ground tyrant. So they will breed, a lot of these birds, these austral migrants will breed in Patagonia, in Argentina, Chile, and then they make their way north to Peru for their winter. Same with these gray miners. This is another ovenbird family species here. And then these thick-billed miners, another ovenbird. These ones are very localized just on the coast of Peru, and they're only found in just a handful of lomas and really nowhere else on Earth. Very cool little things. Sort of hop around on these boulder fields on the lomas, and it's a very specific habitat, but they love it there. And there's also quite high densities of burrowing owls on these lomas. Like really, they can be really quite abundant, like double figures quite a lot of the time in a pretty small area. So really fun to see those guys all the time, even though they are quite widespread. And here you can see a view from sort of the upper reaches of one of these lomas, and you can see all this greenery, and then off in the distance, sort of that more barren landscape heading out towards the coast. Here is myself, Isaac, and Andy, who you might know. All right, and then we're going to move on to a different region here. So this is the Peruvian Amazon here. What we've got on the screen here is basically northern Peru, and a large chunk of basically northeastern Peru is really just the Amazon rainforest, with really very few roads, not too much development in general. Really, the development is quite limited to the banks of the Amazon, and that's because there really is no major roadway to any of these towns. The roadway is the Amazon itself. So in the middle here we have the town of Iquitos. It's the largest city in the world that is not connected to any other significant cities by road. I think it's maybe like 400,000 or 500,000 people. Off the top of my head, I can't quite remember, but somewhere in that range. It's the largest city in the world that isn't connected by a road. So just right out there in the middle of the Amazon. And so that's where you fly in generally if you're gonna sort of explore some of this Amazonian habitat out there. And in Iquitos itself, you have these huge martin roosts on a lot of the wires in downtown. A lot of these roosts will number well into the thousands. These are pretty much all southern martins, although purple martin does also winter in the Amazon. It's kind of not super well known exactly where the boundaries are for each of them, and they're really quite hard to identify. The females of purple martin are a little lighter than southerns. As far as I could tell, the ones in Iquitos were all southern, but yeah, about 4,000 or 5,000 martins on pretty small amounts of wire. Some gray-breasted martins mixed in too. There's lots of them. And then in the Amazon rainforest itself, a lot of the diversity is driven by just the succession of lots of different habitats all at once, like many other places with high diversity. So all of these birds here are ant birds. There is a huge diversity of ant-reliant birds in general in the Amazon, and the family of ant birds is certainly no exception. There are a whole lot of ant birds found nowhere else, of course. And some of them are very localized to, say, river islands. So in the Amazon, new river islands are forming all the time. And after 5 or 10 years of being a river island, the vegetation, especially cecropias, which are oftentimes the first vegetation to grow in that region, very quick to take up root. These different aged river islands all support different species. So if you want to see all of the river island specialties, you have to go to a young river island, say 1 or 2, 3 years old, one that's 5, 10, 20 years old, and so on. And the birds will all be different for the most part. It's pretty remarkable. All right. So dot back to antbird here. Some more river island specialties here. So pale-billed hornero in the bottom left, a lesser wagtail tyrant in the upper left. One of the flycatchers that's endemic to the river islands. I'm off the top of my head not remembering which one that is, I'll be honest. I think it's Fuscus flycatcher though. And then a riverside tyrant in the bottom right. Well, actually, I'll say that upper left photo with the wagtail tyrant, that's actually a cecropia tree that you're seeing there. So that's sort of the dominant vegetation, especially on the younger river islands where a lot of these species are found. And the diversity here is truly incredible. I mean, the very small area sort of around like the lodge I was staying at, Mayuna Amazon Lodge, has recorded 500 or 600 species in a pretty small area of all the same elevation. So yeah. Another bird of the river islands there is this collared plover on the banks of the Amazon. They're pretty common. And then as you go into the forest interior, there's plenty of special birds, of course. This being one of my favorites, this is a wire-tailed manakin. Just a stunning, stunning bird with a really strange display too. This is him displaying, make all sorts of strange noises and dance around. Really fantastic looking birds. And here is a jacamar. This is eating a huge wasp, actually. Lots and lots of insects in the Amazon, of course, and that is part of the reason, again, there is so much diversity, but also part of the reason so much is declining in the Amazon, because insect life is declining at a very rapid rate in these areas, as are water levels. That was another thing I was experiencing this last fall when I was in the Amazon. Water levels were about, I think, 70 or 80% lower than they ought to have been, and the water was just not coming. It was supposed to be the wet season, and a lot of the days we had going up into the cloud forests that feed the Amazon, it was just sunny, windy, and dry. Not what you want at all. Right. And here we have an Amazonian trogon. Lots of trogon diversity there as well. And blue and yellow macaw is always a favorite. And then some rarer birds here. This is a wattled curassow in the bottom left. Really, really fantastically rare bird. And a rufous-necked puffbird in the upper right. Again, very rare. The curassow is slightly wider ranging, but again, it's found mostly right along the banks of rivers and mostly just on river islands, and is pretty heavily hunted too, being one of the few really large birds there. And so I think they're least endangered and maybe should be critically endangered. And a lot of the birding is done by boat in that area. Of course, there's no roads, and a lot of the birds are right along the rivers there. Like this green and rufous kingfisher, or this American pygmy kingfisher. And boat-billed herons at night, roaming the edges of the river. Really crazy looking bill on that thing. Tropical screech owl. And some mammals as well. So saw sloths out there. I mean, of course there are jaguars. I haven't seen one out there yet. But yeah, this sloth was just hanging out actually right over the water at one point, and it was quite active for a sloth. It was really moving around. Not something you see too often. Usually you just see a ball in a tree not moving at all.
Oh.
Very cute. And speaking of cute mammals, this is a pygmy marmoset. Absolutely tiny monkey, I mean, really just minute. And a caiman here as well. All right, so next up we've got Plataforma, or the Cordillera Azul. And so this area is sort of a little ridge, just sort of a final ridge before the Amazon. And a lot of these outlying ridges tend to have a lot of just generally rare birds that have wider ranges but are very rare across that range, but also a number of endemics usually, because it's sort of an isolated island of habitat at that elevation. You can kind of see, so I've got this little red pin here, which is where Plataforma, the town that you go to for all of these, are. And if you look sort of south of the pin here, there's kind of this little line you can kind of see. That's the ridge. That doesn't look very significant on a map, but it means so much to the birds. And if we see here, you can kind of see, let's see, you've got the brown there, that's Paramo habitat, so really very high elevation mountains. And then you've got this valley where all of these towns are, Tingo Maria, Pukiaku, all of that area. And so then you've got one outlying ridge, that's the Cordillera Azul, where a lot of these endemics that you see at Plataforma are. And then if you look in the right-hand side, like back right, you see Pico Sierra, that's another outlying ridge, and there's a lot of birds. If you put in Sierra into eBird, there's Sierra, like barbet, Sierra curassow, there's a lot of birds that are endemic to that ridge as well. Again, just separated by these little valleys, and that's enough to sort of create whole new species. Here's one of the real specialties here, scarlet-banded barbet. They're only in the Cordillera Azul, very recently discovered, I think in the 90s or early 2000s maybe. Yeah, very cool bird. The thing with Plataforma actually as well to know is this little village right on the northern tip of Cordillera Azul. It's really the only accessible point in the whole Cordillera, and until very recently it was not as accessible as it is now, so it took us in our rental car maybe like 3 or 4 hours from the main road to get there on dirt roads. But in the past I had heard of people taking over 20 hours on the roads there, and I mean mud that was just, you know, burying the car tires and stuff. So, you know, good and bad. You can now see the birds quite a lot easier, but of course those slightly better roads also bring quite a lot of development. And as we were driving in, we were seeing a lot of slash and burn, just pretty large areas that, you know, 5 years ago even were all forest and no longer forest. But that being said, also, if you then go further south than Plataforma, it's all a national park, the whole Cordillera Azul, so, you know, there's good and bad there, I guess. But it is pretty painful driving past hours of burning forest. So this is the range map here of that barbet. You can see that little purple line that it's got the arrow to show you. This is another really rare bird that you can see at Plataforma. This is a jet manakin. They're seen in a few other places along outlying ridges in the Amazon, mostly in Peru. But this is really the only place you can reliably see it in the world. And another really good one is the yellow-throated spadebill. These are, again, on outlying ridges all the way up through Ecuador and even on some tepuis in Venezuela. But across that whole range, they are very, very scarce. Really tough to actually find. Very tiny little flycatches, usually pretty quiet. So, yeah, not too easy to find these things. And the scarlet-breasted fruit eater, they're a really stunning specialty of outlying ridges as well. And here we have a few more specialties. Gray-tailed peahaw in the upper left, Jungus manakin in the upper right. So that manakin is currently lumped in with Jungus manakin, which is mostly found in Bolivia, but this is an outlying population that's sort of, you know, thousands of miles really from the nearest other birds. So it's probably its own species. It's probably just yet to be like really thoroughly researched. It's gray-throated leaf tosser in the bottom left and blackish pewee in the bottom right. Blackish pewee is an odd one. It seems like, and most pewees are really pretty common birds anywhere in their range. Blackish pewee, for some reason, is just really hard to track down. There's only a couple of locations anywhere in the world that you can semi-reliably see them, this being one of them. Very unusual bird. And this is the foothill screech owl we saw there. This is the road into Plataforma there. It's not too bad these days, but previously, yeah, it was very, very deep mud. And so next we've got the Tarapoto and Moyobamba area. So you can kind of see in the sort of center right there's Tarapoto. That's the largest town in northern Peru. It's the main place you would fly into for any of these birds. And then as you follow that main highway up and left to Moyobamba, basically that whole valley that's sort of covers that whole area between Tarapoto and Moyobamba is quite a lot lower and drier than any surrounding habitat, so it has just a really interesting selection of species that aren't found almost anywhere else. In fact, the drier areas, there's quite a bit of dry forest actually around the towns themselves, especially Tarapoto. And a lot of the species found there are actually found nowhere else in the Andes at all. Not Peru, not Ecuador, none of that. They're really only actually found in southern Brazil and northern Argentina. Weirdly, a lot of those don't seem to be that genetically different from their counterparts in southern Brazil and Argentina. I've heard different theories on why that is. Some say that it's because when Incas were developing a lot of this region, that allowed the spread of a lot of these species through like agricultural corridors basically, and then they sort of only survived in these little core agricultural areas around Tarapoto and Moyobamba, but who knows? This is one of them. This is a rusty-backed ant wren.
So cute.
And you can see this is their range. It's mostly sort of the southern Brazil area, and then there's these little dots in Peru where there's some drier habitat. And you've also got this Planalto hermit here. And this doesn't even show a dot in Peru, but it's, yeah, again, sort of that northern Argentina, Paraguay, and southern Brazil for the most part. Very interesting range. And this is a dot-winged antbird. And we also had upland sandpiper in some of this drier forest there. On their migration, they have one of the longest migrations of really any species for the most part. And they breed, of course, here, as near to here as Willow Run Airport, I guess, a lot of the time. And then they spend the winter in sort of Argentina, Chile, that area. And on the way, they stop over in bits of rainforest in the Andes. Someone I know recently, I saw they had posted about they were in the rainforest in Santa Marta in Colombia and just walking a road in cloud forest and had an upland sandpiper just in the middle of this road in the middle of the cloud forest. So they really do just drop in sort of anywhere along there. This is us driving one of these roads around the drier agricultural areas there with a bit of a cow traffic jam there. And then along the edges of that drier forest, there's anywhere where there's a little bit more elevation, that's where the water collects, and so you then tend to get these more sort of classic foothill, like middle elevation rainforests that are quite a bit wetter, and that's where you get a lot of the more classic Andean lowland-ish species like this Andean cock of the rock. Golden-headed manakin. It's sort of an interesting juncture of Amazonian species because this is really quite low a lot of the time, and also some lower elevation Andean species coming down as well. Often this will be like the only place in the world where these species are meeting, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. Golden-collared toucanet. And this is a green manakin, quite a rare one. Doesn't look quite as exciting as the wire-tailed from earlier, but it's quite a lot rarer, so we were quite excited with it. This is one of the rarest hummingbirds in the world. There's a feeder right near Tarapoto, actually, that very occasionally they do come into it. It's the only place that you can actually sort of access it by road. The only other spot which I have been to and where I got this photo is where you sort of have to take all sorts of awful roads and then hike a couple hours into the forest to a camp, and there's some feeders there that have them. That's really the only good spot, but this spot in Tarapoto occasionally gets it, and we did actually have one fly in very briefly on one of my tours, so that was very exciting.
What's it called?
This is a Gould's jewel front.
And what was the other hummingbird?
Sorry, pink-throated brilliant. Yeah, it's arguably the rarest hummingbird in the world, and I guess the helmet crest in Santa Marta is a little harder, but it's probably the only one that I can think of that's harder than pink-throated brilliant. Cliff flycatcher here. This is, again, pretty widespread along the foothills of the Andes, but only where there are pretty significant cliffs. So generally you don't see them, except if you do get a good cliff, there's quite a lot of them. They're pretty high density in the right habitat. And there's some poison dart frogs. I'm actually not sure what species this is, but it's, the area around Tarapoto specifically has just about the highest diversity of dart frogs anywhere in the world. A lot of species in there. And so driving between Tarapoto and Moyobamba, along the highway, there's actually a little slot canyon that there's a bridge in the highway over. And looking down into that slot canyon, there's a huge roost of hundreds of oil birds, these bizarre sort of nightjar-like frugivores. It's the only nocturnal species that only eats fruit. They're a really giant nightjar-looking thing. It's the only bird in its family, and yeah, there's really nothing else like it. All other nightbirds have these really soft feathers that sort of cushion sound as they fly. That's because they mostly hunt things and they want to be quiet. Oilbirds, since they just eat fruit, are really noisy and loud and just make a horrible racket most of the time. They also make some really awful screeches and stuff. And sort of right around midday, the slot canyon, the light filters into it, and they also sort of start getting a bit restless and they fly around and make all sorts of noise. So yeah, here's another one looking down into the slot canyon there. This is the canyon itself with Brandon standing on the edge there. And if you look down, it's really this very narrow slot canyon, but it's filled with oil birds, hundreds of them. So really pretty remarkable. Doesn't look like much at all. Here they are sort of roosting on the edge of it.
Wow.
And I really can't stress this enough. I mean, these are huge. Like most nightjars are sort of this, sort of size. These are like truly massive. I mean, really giant things and very ungainly. Another specialty of this area, in fact, specifically Wakanki Lodge for the most part, the main lodge in Moyobamba, that is. Their flower garden attracts these rufous-crested coquettes. Really gorgeous, tiny hummingbird. Always a favorite. Really amazing looking. Another angle of him. And also right around Moyobamba, there are these painted mannequins. This was only described in 2017. And I think the first, the population itself, they first found it in the early 2000s. But yeah, described in 2017, only a couple of sites with it. And they're a real pain. I mean, I've heard now quite a lot of these birds. Seeing them is just awful, though. They bury themselves so deep in this really dense, very mosquito-infested forest. What's interesting about the tropics usually is that mosquito life is actually, and biting insects are actually pretty rare, surprisingly. In most of the tropics, you don't actually encounter them at the same levels that you would even in Michigan most of the time. But this was certainly an exception. This is by far the worst I've had it anywhere, and it's every place that I found painted mannequins, it seemed like they must share an exact habitat match with these mosquitoes, because it was awful. And you're just trying to stand still looking through all of this stuff to try and get a glimpse of one of these things. You're just getting bitten alive and only hearing zzz the whole time. It's quite unpleasant, but really cool looking bird and very rare as well. So, yeah. And some of the wetlands around Moyobamba also have some pretty interesting species. This is a monotypic family as well as just like the oil birds. This is the only species in its family. This is a black-capped Donychobius. Really strange kind of blackbirdy sort of thing. Very loud. And they have these sort of weird yellow skin pouches in the neck. Also quite a few crakes. They actually feed some of these crakes at a few places around Moyobamba. Just how you get these photos. Rufous-sided crake. And this is a sulphury flycatcher. This and a couple of other species around there for example, point-tailed palm creeper as well, are very specific to moriche palms, which are a pretty specific Amazonian type of palm that tends to sort of grow in pretty large stands in really swampy areas. And several of these species you only ever find in those palms, nowhere else. So, also have quite a lot of, quite good nightjar diversity there in general. This is a spot-tailed nightjar. Yeah. And there's also some tinamous. So there's a good sort of corn feeder actually in the rainforest, quite near Moyobamba, and this is where you really get some good looks at some of these ground birds that would otherwise be really hard to find. So you tend to hear, like this is a cinereous tinamou, you hear these tinamous quite often walking around the forest, especially early in the morning, but actually seeing them, it's a nightmare. So, you know, you go to these corn feeders and like any chicken, they'll come to corn pretty readily. And sure enough, here they are. This is the cinereous with its chick here, and then we also have little tinamou here with its chick. Really adorable little things. There's also a rufous-fronted wood quail there coming to this corn. And gray-cowled wood rail.
That's amazing.
And then this is black-bellied or Huayaga tanager. It's very similar to quite a common bird called silver-beaked tanager that's found sort of all across the foothills and lowlands of the Andes. But this species is quite a bit darker and is only found in this valley around Moyobamba and Tarapoto for the most part. It's endemic to Peru. This is a more common widespread tanager, but a really gorgeous one. This is a paradise tanager. And then this is a striolated mannequin. A bit more common than the painted mannequin, but also pretty tricky. And so yeah, you could see he really wasn't a fan of turning towards me. But then this is Zimmer's antbird. Very scarce as well. This was recently split off from chestnut-tailed antbird. A lot of South American bird genetics are still sort of in the works. There's a lot of splitting off of species as they learn a little bit more about these birds. Especially, I mean, Peru is so underbirded and there's so little knowledge about, you know, quite a lot of the taxa there. There's plenty of species that are kind of known right now in Peru that still haven't been described. We will, in fact, get to one of those eventually here. This is a rufous-fronted nunbird, same area. And lanceolated monklet, really cute little thing. Tiny, tiny little puff bird. Then we move on to Altomayo. So this is sort of, we're moving west here generally from Tarapoto. So if you look where that highway, just under where I've written Altomayo, that highway sort of comes up and over. And you see below that it's Bosque de Protección Altomayo. Where that highway cuts through it, that's where everyone birds this sort of highland forest here. And there are quite a few specialties to this forest, of course, as well. It's a really beautiful forest, really good cloud forest, very high quality habitat that extends just as far as the eye can see. And we have some specialties like this ochre-fronted antpitta, really tiny, tiny little tennis ball looking thing.
He has a nice mustache.
And that's his range, just, as you can see, really just in that area around Altomayo. Same with this rusty tinged antpitta. And this chestnut antpitta. They really do look so silly. And they have a lot of personality too, the way they sort of run up to you and sort of look sort of scared, and eventually they'll take a worm and then run off into the forest. So there's some good owls there as well. So this is a cinnamon screech owl. They are loosely found in the foothills of the Andes all the way from sort of southern Colombia all the way down through Peru. but there are really only a handful of spots where people have actually ever found them, this being one of them. Quite an unusual screech owl. Most screech owls kind of look more or less the same and just sound different, but this one actually looks quite different, really quite cinnamony. And then we have long-whiskered owlet, one of the most bizarre owls in the world, unrelated really to any of the other owls, and yeah, just very bizarre. Tiny little thing with these very long whiskers, only discovered in I think like the 80s or 90s by an LSU research team, and then only found in areas accessible to sort of a non-expedition team more recently than that in sort of the early 2000s. Yeah, very cool owlet.
No tail.
And locally it's called the lechucita. This is a cinnamon-breasted toady tyrant, another really localized bird in Altomayo. This one is like quite a few actually other species in Altomayo, not the owlet, but a lot of the other species is actually very specific to low, sort of the stunted forest where there's almost no like nutrients in the soil, which creates, even though at this altitude there should be really tall cloud forest in general, these areas have just really stunted, dense vegetation, and it provides habitat to species that are found nowhere else as well. This is another one of those species. This is a royal sun angel, very specific to these stunted forests. This is the female royal sun angel. And then another special hummingbird there. This is an emerald-bellied puffleg. They come to the feeders at Owlet Lodge, one of the main lodges there. And sword-billed hummingbird, quite a lot more widespread than those other ones, but really impressive nonetheless. And it's really bizarre seeing those come to a feeder and try and angle their bill into it. It looks very wrong. Got an amethyst-throated sun angel here. And this area is also known for having some of the best tanager flocks, or mixed flocks in general, anywhere in the world. There's a specific area of the highway there that's known as the mega flock zone. And you can usually tell why. There's really massive tanager flocks sometimes, including some of the really, really rare species of tanager, like this vermilion tanager, one of the hardest ones to catch up with in the Andes usually. And this yellow-throated tanager as well, another one of the scarcer tanagers in the Andes. Deep blue flower piercers as well, mixed in with these big mixed flocks. White-capped tanagers. These ones actually don't follow mixed flocks, bizarrely. They're one of the most, quite possibly the most unusual tanager. They are mostly associated with these wasps' nests, and they travel very long distances all day in single species flocks looking for these wasps' nests. And it'll be, 8-10 birds, only the white-capped tanagers, and they're really noisy. That's the way you find them usually. They're very scarce, but they make a huge racket. These quite jay-like noises usually, which is very unusual for a tanager. Most tanagers have almost no voice at all, just quite pathetic little tss sort of noises, but these are really loud and very social. So this is a more typical tanager. This is a flame-faced tanager. And a grass green tanager. And this one is a spot-winged parrotlet. This is one of the birds I was most excited to find when I was there. These parrotlets are very, very low density in cloud forests up and down the Andes, but actually seeing them is usually pretty impossible, and I think the eBird page for them makes specific reference to the fact that you would never ever see one perched. So I was very excited to actually finally see one perched. And this is a Lulu's toady flycatcher, or Johnson's toady flycatcher. A really funny little thing. Yeah. And they make the sort of noises that they look like they should make, like little beep, beep, beep sort of noises and jump around in the bamboo, eventually pop out at long last. Really tiny little things again. And this is an unspotted tit tyrant, another sort of bamboo specialist in these really high altitude areas of the Alto Mayo. This is a barred fruit eater. Again, the higher altitude sections of Alto Mayo have barred fruit eater and quite a few other species that you can't get, a little lower down. So it's a little bit more stunted vegetation, but actually supposed to be, not just because of the nutrients in the soil. It's the green and black fruit eater. And an undulated antpitter that was running in the trail in front of us. And a Peruvian wren hiding out there. This is some of that higher elevation forest. And you can see it's a little shorter, but still really dense with all sorts of bamboos and ferns and flowers. Lots of moss, of course. Then we move on to the Utcubamba Valley. This is, if you see that road going south there, and you see how those two lines of brown, signifying that really high elevation tree line habitat. That valley in between there is the Utcubamba Valley, and it's quite a bit drier than any of the surrounding areas, especially in the center of that valley. This is the only place in the world with quite a few species, but what it's really known for in the birding world is the marvelous spatula tail. That's the only place in the world where it is, and it's one of the best birds in the world. This is a view from the hotel there. Some nice dry forest. And a really good waterfall there as well, actually. Torrent ducks in the river there. And then here is the main attraction, this marvelous spatula tail. It's just an absolutely ridiculous looking hummingbird. The adult males, the tails, and when they're going through like really dense shrubs, it looks hilarious just dragging this tail through it. And I think they supposedly lose that tail feathers quite frequently as a result and have to regrow them all the time. Here's another shot. And this is a young male stretching himself out there. And then this is a fully adult male, but you can see his tail streamers are quite a lot shorter, and that's because he's presumably lost his fairly recently. And here's that longer-tailed male again. And then there's also these purple-colored wood stars, usually, the same sort of flowers and feeders that you see the spatula tails at. Would otherwise be a very, very gorgeous hummingbird, but no one pays them too much attention usually with the spatula tails around. This is an Andean slaty thrush coming into the bananas there, keeping us occupied while the spatula tails sort of wait to come in. And then this is one of the other dry forest specialties here. This is a Marignon crescent chest. Really bizarre looking relative of tapaculos, if anyone knows what they are. Very skulky South American family that just dig themselves into the densest brush imaginable. And then this is a piculate. I am forgetting the name of it. Which piculate is that? It's scaly. I won't go for it. But anyway, this is the Marignon endemic piculate. So pretty cool looking bird that is. And then this is a Marignon thrush. Again, also endemic to these dry valleys in central Peru. And a Marignon gnatcatcher. A lot of the birds you tend to see around there all have Marignon at the start of their name. It's the name of the river that sort of is in the main dry valley in that area. And it's one of the main rivers that actually feeds the Amazon. And here we have a Marignon screech owl, or Peruvian screech owl right now. It's going to be split out as two species, one being Marignon screech owl, which is this one, and then one on the Pacific coast called, I guess, I don't know, Pacific screech owl, I'll probably call it, something like that. Although there is already a Pacific screech owl, so who knows what they'll call it. This is a Jungus pygmy owl, so the edges actually of the Utcubamba Valley get a lot moister, and that's why you start to pick up some of these cloud forest species. Coppery metal tails as well, so they're at the higher elevations along the edges. And yellow scoffed tanager, really special tanager, endemic to Peru. And then you got these gray-breasted mountain toucans, really spectacular, and in this part of their range, they have bright green eyes. And most of the range is anywhere north, sort of Ecuador, Colombia, where most people tend to see these birds. They just have a pretty normal looking black eye, but that green eye is really striking in the southern part of their range. Then we move on to the Marañón Valley and Cajamarca area. And so if you look where the word Cajamarca starts here and sort of go down, there's this line, this sort of gray, really deep valley. That is sort of a separator for a lot of species. A lot of stuff is found on one side of the valley, but not on the other side of the valley. And the valley itself, because it's a really unique, very, very dry habitat, also has quite a few endemic species to that valley as well. One of these being buff-bridled Inca finch being a genus that is entirely endemic to Peru. There are 5 species, and Isaac and I, when we did our little scouting trip here before one of my tours this last year, we saw all 5 species of Inca finch. And then this is a barefaced ground dove. This is one of the roads going through that really dry valley there. It's really spectacular. It's a really beautiful country, Peru, even if it weren't for the birds. Here we are, all running over, I think, to photograph that ground dove, actually, right up on that bank. And here's a Peruvian pygmy owl. Really a very, very common bird in most of their range there. You can get them at very high densities, quite a lot like Ferruginous pygmy owl, I guess, in a lot of Mexico and Latin America more generally. This is a chestnut-backed thornbird, really, really localized right around the west edge of the valley, nowhere else. Same with this gray-winged Inca finch. Then this is a bronze-tailed comet. This was only very recently rediscovered after quite a long time. And right now it's really only known from a single site at a bridge just north of Cajamarca. This being the one spot they're at. And this is another really tricky bird. This is a great spine-tail, very, very rare endemic of that same valley area, but these only inhabit this really, really sort of awful thorn scrub, really dense thorny bushes, and it took a long time to find this thing when we were scouting this last time around. We spent sort of 2 or 3 hours in the morning looking around this thorn scrub, one of the main sites for it, could not find anything at all. Moved on, saw some more thorn scrub further down on our drive that looked really good. Got out, tried for quite a while. Isaac and Brandon and everyone had kind of given up, and I decided to bushwhack through some of this and got all scratched up. And I did eventually find them and managed to show them to everyone, but in a second here you can see these thorns. It's really nasty, really huge thorns. I sort of covered up, but it was not enough. Here I am in front of some of the thorn scrub and the big old century plants there. And then that bird we saw along a drive that was really in the hope of seeing this species, which is purple-backed sunbeam, which is only found in one very small patch of forest, really just in the middle of nowhere. It's like an 8-hour drive from anywhere. It's just awful to get to. There's really not much else there. And yeah, we just drove 8 hours on awful dirt roads to get here. Slept in the one place that we had to wake up the owners to the one place that you could stay at there, and then thankfully saw it the next morning, and then had to drive another 7 or 8 hours in the other direction to get somewhere else.
That's cute.
And there's the range of that hummingbird. This is a rufous-headed brushfinch. Oh, actually, it's one of the brushfinches that's in that same forest where the sunbeam is. And then we move on to the northern coast, or the Tumbes region. So this area also has, again, like everywhere else in northern Peru, just so many species that are found nowhere else on Earth because it's this isolated, dry habitat. And different endemic species are found right across the whole habitat gradient there, everywhere from, if you see right along the coast there, in the northern section, you see that just very barren desert habitat, and then all the way up the slope as it gets increasingly sort of moist, that whole gradient, each sort of elevation range has its own specialties. One of the toughest ones is this Puira chat tyrant. A real nightmare to find this thing is. And then this is a russet-bellied spinetail. This was the next bird we saw on the same day as the purple-back sunbeam. It's found really only in one site as well. And we basically we saw that first thing in the morning and then left, 6:30 after seeing the sunbeam, and drove like 7 or 8 hours to where this was. Let's see, this is the little range on the coast there. And this is a great Inca finch, found in the same area as that spinetail, but also further down near Lima you can see it as well, as you get into the coastal facing mountains. And then this is the rarest of all the birds here, probably. This is a chow spinetail. It's still not described right now as a species yet. It should be described pretty soon, though, in the next year or two, I guess, as far as I've heard. And it is only found in this one little section of scrub outside the town of Chao in coastal Peru. And the whole footprint of the area that it's found in is probably no more than about 2 or 3 times the size of this library, and nowhere else is it found. They're really quite common in that sector of scrub, but nowhere else for whatever reason. So, and you can see those giant thorns in there. It was awful chasing them about in there trying to find one. That's the eBird range there of that, right on that little town.
2 pixels.
Here are a selection of other Tumbes endemics. So in the upper right, we've got Tumbes swallow, and a white-headed brushfinch in the upper left. Cinnamon something flycatcher. It's not cinnamon flycatcher because there's another cinnamon flycatcher. But anyway, no, it's rufous flycatcher. Sorry, that's what it is. It's a Myarchus flycatcher. So like our great-crested flycatcher here in the U.S. And Myarchus in general all look more or less identical. Varying degrees of sort of faded, not faded, this and that. But this is really the only Myarchus flycatcher that looks completely different to all the other ones. Not really sure why that is, and I don't know if that really warrants it maybe being a little bit further genetically, I don't know. But there it is. And then we have sulphur-throated finch in the bottom right. Looks a bit like a house sparrow, but it's a lot rarer. And this is a Peruvian plant cutter. Only found in these little vegetated pockets in the desert right along the coast at sea level. And like the name suggests, it is completely vegetarian. Spends all day chewing leaves and makes very strange sort of cat-like calls. This is some of that coastal desert, very barren. But then you see, this is actually a bit of a loma, actually. Where the mist is collecting there on that ridge. This is where we were looking for a cactus canistero, which we did find but did not photograph, so there you go. And then this is a white-winged guan. think it's still critically endangered. It's only found on one reserve, Chapari. It's a really good nature reserve, and they've been doing really good conservation work with it. And its numbers have increased pretty dramatically since they started the conservation work there, but it's still probably only a few hundred individuals. The ones around Chapari's lodge itself are very tame, though. They sort of flop around and sit on top of the restaurant at the lodge and on top of the rooms, which is pretty funny for one of the rarest birds in the world. This is a Tumbes hummingbird and a Tumbes sparrow, really massive bill on him. Then one of the more common birds in all of that coastal and drier central valleys of Peru is this Pacific parrotlet. Really noisy little flocks moving around all the time in all of that dry habitat. And the croaking ground doves, another really common bird in the coastal areas of Peru. They make a little bit of a sort of thought-like sound. And golden grosbeak, really beautiful. This is some of that foothill habitat, this dry forest as you're just getting up into the mountains above the coast, gaining a little bit of elevation. Really unique dry forest with lots of epiphytes all over the trees a lot of the time too. And so this here is sort of the end of their winter, I guess, which is the dry season there. So you can see it's looking very brown, a lot of dead stuff, but in the sort of, if you were to go there in like February, March, after a lot of the rains have happened, it's very lush actually. This is a tyra holding some sort of citrus fruit. It was getting mobbed by all sorts of Inca jays and all sorts of little birds as well. They were very angry about it. Very large mustelid, that is. Kind of like a big old land otter, I guess is the closest equivalent maybe. Just a very large weasel. And then this is a Tumbes chat tyrant. A little easier than the Puira chat tyrant earlier. The amount of chat tyrants in general in northern Peru is incredible. You can find pretty much every species there. And then this is an elegant crescent chest, the sort of coastal counterpart of Marignon crescent chest that we saw earlier. Chapman's antshrike, black-cowled saltator, and a white-winged brush finch. These white-winged brush finches are really variable. Different subspecies of these ranging from sort of southern Ecuador to northern Peru. I mean, they look like they should be different species, probably are. And a three-striped warbler here. Yeah, and that is all of the presentation there. So, thank you, everyone. This is by no means exhaustive. There are, I mean, truly over 1,000 species just in northern Peru that I saw this last few tours. I think the combined 2 tours I saw well into the 900s. So yeah, this is just a bit of a tasting of the whole habitat. Otherwise I would yeah, bore you guys to death potentially, but there you go.
Thank you.
Any
We should come up
questions
with
or
some
anything?
questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. Let's see. This is mostly from, and pretty much all of these photos were from last fall, and I was there from sort of mid-September to mid-October, a little bit over a month. I did 2 tours and then a bit of scouting as well, so yeah. A lot of driving as well. I mean, the two weeks, and I don't know if anyone's talked to Andy about when he went with me scouting, but we just about killed him, to be honest. It was pretty brutal. I think, and Brandon and I did all of the driving pretty much, mostly, yeah, it was like 8 hours of driving every day, just about, for 2 weeks. So there's a lot of ground to cover, especially when you want to get stuff like that purple-back sunbeam, yeah, that just is, 8 hours from anywhere else. And since we don't do that on the tour, I wanted to get it myself. And so, yeah, a lot of just very long drives involved, but yeah, not too long.
Ben, your photographs are great. What were you shooting with?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a Nikon D500 and a Nikon 500 5.6 PF.
Yep.
Yeah. It's what you see a lot of the guides carrying around because it's good. It's not like as good maybe as like some of the really professional like 500 f4, 600 f4 setups, but it's small enough that you can actually carry it around, which makes all the difference.
You're
Yeah.
talking about not getting so stuck in the mud on the way to platform.
Yeah.
How much is the road improved and how much is it just drier?
I mean, you definitely are going to be a lot faster there if you go in the dry season. It probably is longer in the wet season, but as far as I'm aware, it has also just generally improved quite a lot. I don't think, and 3 hours was never possible back even like 4 or 5 years ago. Even when it was drier, it was taking people quite a lot longer. It's developed quite a lot though, as a result. Yeah, it's a lot of habitat destruction, and it's getting harder to find some of the birds in the town now because the population has increased with the better road, and so there's more agriculture. And so now you're having to sort of push a little further into the forest from there to actually see any of these birds. Yeah, that's how it goes a bit, I guess, in a lot of these areas. Yeah. So I'm mostly guide for wings birding tours, but I also lead some tours for Washington Audubon. I've actually been talking, I was going to talk to you about this, Juliet. I've been talking to some of my local contacts in Peru about putting together a Washington Audubon, Washington Bird and Nature Alliance, sorry,
Yeah.
tour to northern Peru at some point in the near future. I've got it
Fantastic.
mostly worked out with one of the local companies there, figuring out the driver and everything. So, yeah, hopefully in the near future we'll have one of those. Yeah.
That would be great. It's been
Yeah.
a long time since, Dana, you went to Peru with Washtenaw.
Yeah, Central Peru is really crazy. You guys went to Central, which is ridiculous. I've also done that, but that's even quite a lot tougher than Northern Peru, especially infrastructure-wise, or finding food at all. Yeah, finding lodging and food in Central Peru is not an easy thing to do.
Over here with
Yeah.
Were those oil birds you saw the same ones that would be in the caves in Tingo Maria?
Yeah, same species. They're pretty wide-ranging. It's just that the well-known roosts are few and far between. I think, yeah, really all up and down South America. I think Brazil just got its first record, and Trinidad and Tobago also has a couple of caves that have them. But yeah, they also, and so you do get these large, well-known roosts in caves, but what they're working out recently is they do also just roost in the forest. It's just way harder to find them when there's not like 300 sitting out in the open in a cave.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah.
So I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a big range, but could you talk a little bit about the attitudes of the locals towards birds and towards birding?
Yeah, I mean, so in the Andes in general, I tend to find people are really interested in general, really positive about birds. A lot of the time they know a lot of the birds themselves, the locals. I think with that amount of biodiversity, it kind of hits you in the face a lot of the time, so it's hard not to be interested a lot of the time for these guys. And yeah, people are usually really appreciative and interested that you've come to see, the birds that are right around them in their backyards and stuff, I guess. And yeah, no, it's like, as much as there is like quite a bit of habitat destruction, as I was talking, especially around platyforma and stuff, I mean, it's mostly out of, necessity. It's not a very economically well-developed area, and so people do what they need to do, but people, I think, do in general in that region really tend to appreciate wildlife pretty well, and you also see, I guess I'm forgetting in Peru whether or not you see it as much, but certainly in Ecuador, you see a lot of signs along the roads all over about protecting wildlife and being aware of this and that. So there's pretty generally good awareness, I think, in Latin America, especially in the Andes where I've traveled.
Yeah, Ben, could you talk a little bit about the sort of the infrastructure for ecotourism?
Yeah, so Peru, and a lot of birding from Americans, Brits, and everyone going down to South America. Most people tend to go to, especially northern Ecuador, because that's sort of the most well-known, most infrastructure-heavy area of the Andes. Colombia as well gets a lot. Peru kind of gets the least because the roads are not fantastic, and a lot of the time, as much as the birding is probably the best in the world, I do think it is better than Colombia or Ecuador. It's tough going a lot of the time, especially as you guys may have found out, central Peru is really tough. I mean, really brutal to bird. But northern Peru is a bit better. Depends what you do with it, really. Like, if you're chasing after every single bird, like, it gets pretty awful because you have to go out to where the sunbeam is, you have to go out to where the russet-bellied spinetail is, and it gets messy. Like, you have to drive awful distances on really, really bad roads. But if you just do, like, the main route where tours are done, like Tarapoto, Moyobamba, Altomayo, the Ocabamba Valley where the spatula tails are, all the way across the Chiclayo. And the roads can be a bit of a drag. There's often like really bad construction wait times. One time, this last time, I was driving back from Chiclayo towards Tarapoto, and I got stopped at like roadworks at 11 at night, and they didn't move for like an hour and a half. And that's pretty typical. But besides that, the lodging in the main route of northern Peru is really nice in general. There's some really, really nice hotels, especially where the spatula tails is. That's a fantastic hotel, really beautiful. Really, really good place. So yeah, it can be done comfortably. It just you wouldn't go for every single little thing off to the side, but there's plenty besides that. It's, yeah, very, very diverse, all of it. So, yeah. Any other questions? No? All right. There you go. Thank you, everyone.
Many thanks to Ben for a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did too. Had something I wanted to say. Oh, next month, come to the program I described about Black Birders Week and why it's important. We're also going to be nominating officers at that program. So that'll be third Wednesday in May, whatever the date is on that. All right.